Hello everybody and welcome to Guide Adventure, where I try to encourage you, inspire you, and push you in various directions to create your own adventures, using things from all around us, rambling about in the ruins, for example. Well, I had promised you some caves, but you had decided that it would be way more interesting to look into the world-building book that my friend Marie released on Kickstarter and successfully funded. Now, the book is still available for late pledging, so I thought, well, you know what? You've said use the book. Let's do some examples from that book and see exactly how it will help you to create more engaging, interesting locations, worlds, and therefore adventures. And so that's exactly what we're going to be doing in the next few episodes, is I'm going to be working through Marie's book and seeing what we can come up with. Now, if you are playing in my November game of Dungeons & Dragons in a Castle, please don't watch these videos, at least not until after you have played in my adventures. The reason is I've decided I'm going to develop one of the nations within my bigger world of Braxia called Drakenmoore. And I'll tell you all about Drakenmoore as we go through the series, but the adventures in November are set in Drakenmoore. So, be gone with you. Thank you very much. And of course, if you are wondering what is D&D in a Castle, well, you can go and check out the website, D&D in a Castle, link down below, and find out all about D&D in a Castle and what happens there. I think November's pretty much booked in now, so you'd be looking at maybe next year, April, or perhaps joining me in June next year when I'll be running something quite apocalyptic. Anyway, on with looking at Marie's book. And so I've got all of the exercises. Now, what Marie has done is she's actually sent me the Word document that she created in writing the book. This is as raw as it gets, because the actual book is still being laid out and all that kind of stuff. So that's why if it looks a little bit like a Word document, it's because it is a Word document. And there you go. You can see World Building Blueprints by Marie, and she has put a lot of effort into this whole thing. And we've got exercise number 1 ready to go. And of course, if you like what I'm doing, remember to hit that subscribe button and the bell button to alert you when new videos have come out. I know some folks aren't getting those. Now, just before we begin, you've been doing the challenges that I posted up for the last 5 weeks, and I have seen some remarkably amazing stuff coming out of it. So massive thank you to all of those of you who have participated. Alan Robson managing to get through to me a PDF of the adventure that is currently being worked on there. Alan, well done to you. It's an exciting one. So evidence that, doing what I'm suggesting can help inspire and spark the imagination. And that, for me, is the ultimate reward. All right, now let's get on with it. And we start our world building at a very unusual place. Now, one of the things that Marie told me about is that you don't have to start these things in any order. You can go literally any way you like and just kind of fill in as you go along. However, there is a structure to her madness, and that's going to be the structure to our madness as well. Worksheet 1A, audience. We have to work out what our audience likes. And we've got a couple of elements to figure in here. We've got the media that your audience enjoys. So what is the stuff that they kind of like watching, reading, consuming, that sort of thing? What is the pacing going to be of our adventure? What is the danger scale, 1 through 10? What's the world depth like, 1 through 10? And of course, themes. Now, I've truncated it down to just one theme. You can have as many themes as you like. The more themes you have, the more complicated the whole thing is. And, well, it's up to you how many themes you want to include. So I'm going to fill this in very, very quickly. But before then, I need to give you an overview of what I'm thinking about. Drakenmoore has been a state in my world of Braxia for decades. I love Drakenmoore. It is a country that's controlled by 8 dark dukes, all of them vampires, and the entire country is covered in perpetual fog. The inhabitants live relatively normal lives, right up until the point that there is the culling. And the culling sees a creature known as the Speaker arrive in a random town, and the Speaker then asks for volunteers. Usually it's 1 or 2, maybe 3 or 4, depending on how hungry the dukes are. And those volunteers then travel with the Speaker to the Duke's castle, where the Duke and his family then feast upon those who have been selected. Your village is only targeted once a year, unless there's been a plague somewhere and the Duke has no choice, but generally speaking, once a year you find 1 or 2 miscreants that you really don't like and you pack them off. That is life in Drakenmoore. Now my players are going to be in there, and I've got some ideas on how this entire adventure is going to play out. Are they trying to kill the dukes? These dukes have been in power for 800 years. They know what they're doing, they're not idiots, and of course there are more than just the vampires roaming around. So I'm going to unpack that and explore that in detail in the exercises today. Right, I've got worksheet 1A to fill in, and I'll see you in a blink of an eye. When it comes to themes, something that Marie talks about in her book is it's up to you as to what are the driving themes of your adventure, of your space. And themes should be heavy hitting. You should go for intense themes. Combat is a given. There's always going to be some kind of conflict, whether that's emotional, mental, spiritual, social, or physical. In role-playing games, physical is always the default, and no one seems to really care too much about how physical that might be. So the themes that we should be looking at are themes that are going to make us think. Perhaps make us pause, perhaps make us a bit angry or a bit sad, but by consciously choosing the themes rather than ignoring them, what you're doing is you're circumventing coming across themes that accidentally arise that you didn't think about that then can cause some kind of grievance with your players. For example, slavery. In traditional history, slavery has, well, it's been around since the invention of civilization, really. So it's expected if we're doing a historical kind of game. In a fantasy world, though, slavery doesn't necessarily have to be there, and it can be a very personal issue to some folks. War, invasion, some kind of phobia, all of those things could naturally just rise up in your adventure, and so it's something that you need to be aware of. So obviously in my game, one of the big things that could come up with Drakenmoore is the culling. People are voluntarily sending themselves off to die. That's basically suicide. It's also sacrifice for the greater good, which I think, I'm just going to write in right now, that's quite an important thing, to sacrifice for the greater good. Yeah, so what else could possibly crop up? Well, when I look at Drakenmoore, there are vampires, and you know me, it's all about leaning into what do the players expect versus what do the players get. And with that expectation, we can entrench stuff. Now, vampires are incredibly sexually charged. Right? The origin of vampires is really rabies. Rabies causes humans to become hypersexual. They become bloodthirsty. They become aggressive. They become emotional. They tend to want to bite and eat anything that's nearby. And as a result, vampires have always had this sort of sexual tension around them. Now, is that something that I want to introduce into my D&D game? Well, I don't necessarily want to introduce it, but I feel like it's definitely something that's going to be there. And so I need to decide, how do I handle this theme, this sexual tension? Most of the time, I'll fade to black. That's me personally. But it does need to be there, and I need to be aware of how I'm going to handle it. It also raises questions of, do my vampires have some kind of equality or inequality amongst the genders? Is a duchess seen as less than or more than equal to a duke? Should there even be a difference? These are the kinds of things that it's worth thinking about now so that I can start to build them into everything that I think of moving forward. So I've included some themes there. We've got sexual tension, domination, and submission. The vampires are all about the submission of the masses to their domination. Mob rule. The mob rules. So here you don't have a choice of going against the system because that's what the peasants are believing in. And I'm going to change this. I'm going to say mob rule and indoctrination. Having come from a country where for most of my childhood, I was indoctrinated into this idea of separate but not equal from the apartheid era of South Africa. It wasn't even a purposeful propaganda. It was just everywhere. It was assumed that everyone accepted it, and people did because there was no alternative ever presented. Well, that's not entirely true. There were some, but they were very quickly put down by the rest of the mob who had been indoctrinated into this thing. And even to this day, 30 years later, we still see that indoctrination, especially in the older folks who are used to certain words being used without even thinking about how they create difference and how they create this division that was put into place by this diabolical government. So that's one of the ideas, is indoctrination. Greater good versus personal good. So what might be good for the character is not necessarily good for the entire community. And I think that that also can be a very interesting theme to look at. Today, it is a major theme. How much of your personal preference, your personal choices, your personal burdens should be given to society to deal with, or unfortunately, in order for society to continue functioning, should you as the individual give up of your own personal stuff? Interesting things. And then the lesser of two evils. The plot and the adventure that I have in mind is definitely about choosing your poison, as it were. So I've got these. I'm going to write down some of my thoughts on this just so that I can remember these things moving forward. Okay, so I've got some notes in there, and hopefully be able to read them on the screen. But it's an interesting first step that we've created this space. There's lots of room there for conflict. The players sacrifice for the greater good. The players are not going to want their PCs to be eaten by vampires. They're going to fight against that. So that's a great grounding for conflict. Sexual tension. What happens if one of the vampires falls in love with the PCs? They're not going to want to eat them. They're going to want to protect them from the other vampires. Again, creating conflict. What about the vampires dominating and everyone else submitting? The entire system is oppressive. Conflict. Mob rule, indoctrination. The people want the system to remain in place, but the system is evil. Conflict. Greater good versus personal good. What the PCs believe to be the right thing might not be the right thing for society. What do the PCs believe is the right thing? PC on PC conflict. Lesser of the two evils. How do you choose the right or the wrong choice? Again, PC on PC, PC on society, PC versus the vampires. There is so much conflict there. It's just waiting to burst out onto the table and allow the players to play it. I'm very excited by this. Very, very excited. Okay, so now we're going to move on to worksheet number 1B, which is the story core, the basic principles, the final principles. And so we get to touchstone. And touchstone is basically where you are describing two or more, generally two is easy though, two or more stories that are similar to this. So love story meets the destruction of an evil empire. You could argue would be the touchstone of Star Wars. It's not a very strong touchstone, but it is a touchstone nonetheless. Coming of age versus the destruction of an evil empire. You can phrase it however you like. Putting these things together allows you to step back when you are looking at your overall build and go, am I on track? Am I on course? Is this actually what's happening? And what do I expect from those touchstone points anyway? Conflict, I've already described all of that in step number 1, so we're okay there. And then you can start to list some of the characters that are going to be part of this entire narrative journey. In our case, we're going to be listing the NPCs. So here we go. Okay, so six antagonists. But why? Well, because the adventure that I have in my mind is we have Drakenmoore, this place, and everybody's fighting over it. If you go back to our themes, sacrifice for the greater good, domination and submission, mob rule, lesser of the evils, that comes from everybody fighting over Drakenmoore. Everybody. And I wanted to reflect that for my players. So usually I have 6 players, so 6 antagonists in my head makes sense. It also means that I could, in theory, have an adventure over the course of 3 days, breaking it up into 2 sections per day. That's adventure per antagonist, which I think works quite well as well, just from a very loose kind of structure. So who are my antagonists? Well, this is the giant spoiler. So again, please, please, please go away if you are going to be playing in my games. We've got the antagonist number 1, the Dukes, the vampires themselves. They want to maintain control at all costs. So that's their purpose, is maintaining control. They're sexual. We know that that's one of their themes. Bloodthirsty, which makes them ruthless and all that kind of wonderful vampiric tropey kind of stuff. And they're vampires. That's just how they work. Antagonist number 2 are mind flayers, the tentacled aliens, slimy, unfeeling aliens. They want to take control of Drakenmoore, just dominate it completely. They're the external force, which are coming in, and they have a very different purpose. Their purpose is to be more evil than the evil characters. Because remember, one of the themes is the lesser of the 2 evils. So are the vampires bad? Sure, absolutely. However, they're only taking 2 people a year from each village. That's still terrifying. The mind flayers want to turn every village into slave camps, where they're just using the people to feed their giant intergalactic armies. That's really bad, right? So we need some alternatives. The Druids. The Druids have long had a history with Drakenmoore in my own thinking about this space, and we're going to talk more about it as we move on. But the Druids are all about rebelling against the idea of these vampires being in charge, of these undead roaming around unchecked, just eating people. It's not natural. So say the Druids. The Druids, however, they're not the good guys either. They need to be indifferent towards the suffering of the people. The humans, the elves, the dwarves, I don't care whether they're suffering or not. The important thing is that nature must take its course. We should restore what has been lost. Fair point. Remember, the entire nation is covered in fog. That's going to ruin the ecologies that were there and bring in a whole new range of ecologies. So, so the Druids are not going to be great people either. They're naturalists, so they're wanting nature to prevail here. They don't care who wins as long as it's nature. We have the werewolves running around, the children of the night. No, not the children of the night. They are the hybrids of the children of the night, the wolves. Werewolves are trying to find independence. I want them to be a submissive race that have been controlled by the vampires, used and abused. Again, going back to themes of domination and submission. They are the guard dogs, quite literally, of the Duke's territories. And I feel that they should be rebelling against this. They should be trying to break those chains. It gives us the opportunity to have some who feel that that shouldn't be the case. So the werewolves are going to have this whole thing going on. They're sexual, they're brutal, and they are pack animals. They work together as a pack. Just a very strong kind of sense of community, mob rule, remember? So that's where the werewolves come in. Then the liches, the undead themselves. Now, the vampires I've always had in my head hate undead. But the vampires themselves are not among the living anymore. They are dead, but living, but dead, but living. So true undead, like skeletons and zombies and liches and things like that, vampires have no use for them. They have no blood on which to feed, so why would I want you in my kingdom? You take up space for no reason. So the vampires and the undead are always going to have a conflict. Here, there is an undead lich running around who's trying to manipulate everybody into turning everybody into the undead, because that's really what the lich wants, right? Well, again, lesser of the two evils. You've got alien, slimy tentacle people trying to use everyone to become slaves, batteries, and food, or you've got the undead trying to turn everyone dead so that the entire nation can just be dead, which is what the dead really want, is for people to join them in their eternal torment. Those are pretty bad choices. You've got the druids and you've got the werewolves, and then we finally have the Zagni, who are freedom fighters. These are the actual people who live in this country. They may not be antagonists necessarily, except that so often I have seen, and history has shown us many times, those who are fighting for freedom, once they get it, often just replace those who have taken charge. So the Zagni, for me, need to represent almost the opposites of the themes that are going on there in many ways, but also need to embody them so that we can see, hey, yeah, you're fighting against domination and sexualization and all that kind of stuff, but that's pretty much what you are. You're hedonistic, bohemians running around trying to launch a rebellion that is full of anarchists. You have no direction, no control. No, because we don't need control. We need everybody to be equal. Why should I determine what you do? You should do you. And if that means robbing, thieving, and murdering, well, that's what you want. So you should be free to do it. To offer the opposite of the theme is something that I think is really worth looking into. So that is working through the narrative, if you will, of what we are going to be building our world for. And I think it's a really important first step. When I first saw it in Marie's book, I was like, wait a second, this kind of feels like I'm writing my story, creating my adventure first, and then doing the world building around it. Well, yes. The world building should be supporting the adventure. We're not creating a world that happens to have adventures in it. Who are we creating that world for? Ourselves? Surely we should be creating the adventure, and then the world supports that adventure and then spawns more adventures out of that. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg, and I think we're starting with the egg at this point, which is great. That's where we need to start. You've got to put your flag down somewhere, and so that's where it is. I'm aware that this video has now run for quite some time just on these first two exercises, and we've got more to go. We've got the big picture where we start to describe the environment, the magic and technology, and the cultures that are within that. Now, this whole challenge that I've been giving you over the past 5 weeks, looking into different cultures, is exactly useful for this particular next section. Worksheet C, the big picture. I'm going to fill in the big picture, and then we're going to end the video. And if you want to see more in this range, if you find this really useful, which I certainly am, I would encourage you to let me know by hitting that like button, and of course leaving comments going, oh, this is great, this is really good. And of course you can find Marie's Kickstarter for late pledges. It's still open. That link will be down below in the doobly-doo. Anyway, so I'm going to fill this in, and then I'm going to finish off the video. All right, so I've made some quick notes for myself before I forget, and that's all that we need to do this week. Now, I'm going to be skipping worksheets 1D and 1E because they're only relevant to novels, but they look at things like story progression, character arcs, and things like that. In role-playing, the characters are the PCs. We don't have to worry about what their journey is going to be. They're going to be creating that themselves. If we were to try and force them, oh, well, actually, at this point, the player character is going to realize the mistakes. That's an impossible task. The player is going to have to realize that for themselves. So there's no point in us planning that. Next week, we'll come back and we will look at worksheet 1F and move on from there. It's very exciting. I can't wait. And I just want to thank Marie for letting me do this, and for you, of course, for providing the support to allow me to actually carry on doing this as well. So, until next week, I wish you and yours the happiest of adventure creation.